Welcome, everybody, to this wonderful event where we're going to talk about the petitions for the water, clean water, and for reproductive rights. My name is Angela Fobbs. I live in Germany and I vote in Florida, and I would like to welcome everyone to this event. Also, I'd just like to remind everyone that it is the giving time of year. So if you would like to make a donation to us, you can go to democratsabroad/donate. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dana Freeling from Finland. She's one of the founders of the DA Environmental Climate Crisis Council and the current chair. Dana, do you want to go ahead and introduce our first speaker?
Yeah, I'm really honored to introduce Joseph Bonasia. He is chair of the Florida Rights of Nature Network and operations and communications director of Florida Right to Clean Water.org, the two organizations behind the campaign to amend the Florida Constitution with the fundamental right to clean and healthy waters. He also serves as Citizens Climate Lobby's volunteer liaison to Senator Rick Scott's office and is co-leading efforts to prevent the destruction of vital wetlands in Southwest Florida. Joseph writes about the right to clean water, rights of nature, and our climate crises. You can read some of his articles at The Invading Sea. Joe will tell us about the need for a constitutional right to clean water in Florida, explaining how this amendment will help to protect Florida's aquatic ecosystems. He will also describe the current challenges and future threats to the amendment process. It is a pleasure to welcome Joe to brief us on this important initiative. Thank you, Joe.
Hello, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me. Take a moment to share my screen. So I've been talking about this amendment for a couple of years, and I have realized that most Floridians understand that we've got some significant water problems here in Florida, but they don't appreciate just how critical a condition some of our waters are in, many of our waters. So I'm very quickly want to catch everybody up to speed on that. I live in Southwest Florida. A big issue down here, as it is for other places in the state, is red tide. Red tides are a natural phenomena, but they have exploded in the last 30 years down here. They're more frequent. When we have them, they last longer, and they are also more intense. Blue-green algae blooms are also a major problem these days in Florida. Lake Okeechobee has 50,000 tons of legacy phosphorus sitting at the bottom, and that just aggravates blue-green algae blooms. Back in 2018, 2019, it was absolutely horrific down here. People were getting sick. It cost our local economy $184 million just in tourist dollars alone. And they lead to, significant diseases. You get sick immediately, but long-term diseases, neurodegenerative diseases such as Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, ALS, it is scary stuff. We've got nearly 1 million acres of estuaries and 9,000 miles of rivers and streams that are contaminated with fecal bacteria. Nobody wants to be swimming in that stuff. Seagrass beds have been disappearing at an astonishing rate. Many of you probably know, I hope you know, that we've had severe manatee mortality within the last couple of years. That's because we have lost tens of thousands of acres of seagrass. This graph is about Indian River Lagoon, where a lot of the manatees have starved to death. We've got 1,000 springs in Florida. 800 of them are polluted. No state has more polluted lake water than does Florida. No state has lost more acres of wetlands than has Florida, 9.3 million acres. So the system isn't working. I don't think it would be a surprise to anybody on this call that a primary reason why it isn't working is because special interests have undue influence over our elected officials and thus over our environmental policy. I can give you specific examples during Q&A if you would like, but I'm going to presume everybody understands that point. Let me talk about one particular instance, though. This was back in 2020. It was then that 89% of Orange County residents amended their county charter. They gave all their waterways rights, the right to exist, to flow, to be free of pollution, and to maintain a healthy ecosystem. They also gave all Orange County residents a right to clean water. Most people think we have this right. We do not, certainly not a fundamental or a constitutional right. So, shortly after that, a Orange County citizen, and for the first time in the history of this nation, 5 bodies of water serving as plaintiffs sued a developer in the Florida DEP in order to prevent a development that was going to destroy 116 acres of wetlands, an obvious violation of these new rights. What happened? That lawsuit was dismissed by the courts. Why? Because also back in 2020, just as quickly as it could, our state legislature stepped in and they took those rights away. They did that by preempting the local authority of the authority of local governments throughout the state to pass laws giving rights to nature or to give citizens any rights to any aspect of the natural world. We could see a couple of things in this. Well, we see the influence of special interests. The legislator who sponsored this amendment was a developer. He subsequently was elected Legislator of the Year by the Florida Farm Bureau. By the way, this was just 2 paragraphs tucked into the 111-page Clean Waterways Act. And it was done late in the session. The other thing to note here is that the legislature must have been very fearful of just how effective a rights-based approach to protecting nature would be, or else they would not have acted as quickly as they did and as strongly as they did to take these rights away. It was this amendment, this preemption did exactly what the legislature wanted it to do. Back at this time, Florida Rights of Nature Network was exactly as it sounds. It was a network of a number of different initiatives throughout the state, working at the local level to pass rights of nature, right to clean water laws. This preemption snuffed out all those efforts. No local governments were going to be willing to go up against the state on this. It was this preemption that compelled us to take a different tact. And that is to amend our state constitution to give all Floridians this fundamental right. It's over the heads of the legislature. I want to take just 2 minutes to talk about a very important case, something that happened about 10 years ago in Pennsylvania. It is a big fracking state, as I presume most everybody knows. And back in 2011, 2012, the legislature passed and the governor signed into law a notorious piece of legislation called Act 13. It was a gift to the fracking industry. Not a surprise, because it was the fracking industry that wrote the legislation. Most of the legislators who signed it never read it. The governor had accepted $1.7 million in campaign contributions at the time. This law would have compelled local governments, municipalities, to allow fracking operations anywhere, basically anywhere anyone wanted to have them, no matter what their zoning laws were. It also came with a gag rule. Doctors weren't allowed to talk publicly about the health impacts they were seeing in their patients from fracking operations. A terrible law. So, much to their credit, a number of these municipalities filed a lawsuit. They argued that this fossil fuel friendly law was unconstitutional. And that is because back in 1972, Pennsylvania voters amended their state constitution, giving themselves fundamental environmental rights. This is their environmental rights amendment. The people have the right to clean air, pure water, and to the preservation of the natural, scenic, historic, and aesthetic values of the environment. This amendment was key in the court's decision. Usually, court decisions, and this went all the way up to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, run about 20 pages. This one ran 162 pages. It was written by the Chief Justice himself. He wanted to make a point. He spent a lot of time detailing the history of environmental degradation in Pennsylvania, timber industry, coal industry, fracking industry. To make this point, he said, it is not a historic accident that the Pennsylvania Constitution now places citizens' environmental rights on par with their political rights. The political rights he's referring to are those we all know in the Bill of Rights: freedom of religion, freedom of speech, right to bear arms, etc. These citizens understood that these environmental rights were just as critical to their well-being and their liberties as Americans as those other rights. Very recently, and I hope everybody is aware of this, in Montana, it was a climate case. There have been a number of youth climate cases. So far, they have not been successful. This one was. 16 young Montanans argued that a fossil fuel friendly law that was on the Montana books violated their constitutional rights, because the Montana Constitution says all citizens have a right to a healthy environment, and the court agreed. This was historic. You can expect to see a lot more climate cases based on this sort of argument, if there is environmental rights at the constitutional level. So we want to do what Pennsylvania has done, what Montana has done, and what most recently New York has done. Just to let you know, what does the Florida Constitution have to say? It shall be the policy of the state to conserve and protect its natural resources and scenic beauty. This is not the explicit declaration of a fundamental right. It's a policy statement. Policy statements simply are not stable enough. They can come and go. They can be changed. Adequate provision shall be made by law for the abatement of air and water pollution. Obviously, adequate provision has not been made. Let's go back to all those facts that I mentioned earlier. Our waters are in terrible condition. So that's why we are undertaking this citizens initiative to qualify a right to clean and healthy waters amendment for the 2024 ballot. This is what the ballot summary says. This amendment creates a fundamental right to clean and healthy waters. The key word there is fundamental, because there are different levels of rights. The highest ones there are fundamental rights. This is important because in a courtroom, when push comes to shove, and it's a property owner's rights or a polluter's rights, and he's given rights by the DEP to pollute, comes up against the people's fundamental rights to clean and healthy waters, the fundamental rights will prevail. The amendment may be used to sue state executive agencies for harm or threatened harm to Florida's waters. If you're going to amend the Florida state constitution, it has to be very narrowly focused on a single subject, or else the Florida Supreme Court will say it is unlawful. So we cannot go after corporations that pollute. We cannot go after the legislature, only the executive branch of government. But that is enough, because it is the executive branch that is responsible for making sure that our environmental regulation laws are enforced and applied. So you may know that in the last 10 or so years down here in Florida, there have been other attempts to amend our Constitution, even successful ones, only to see the legislature undermine the will of the people afterwards. We saw this with the felon amendment. We saw this with Amendment 1 a number of years ago, where the people voted for a lot of money for conservation efforts, land acquisition, and the state pulled the rug out from under those. I wouldn't say it's impossible, but it would be exceedingly difficult for the same thing to happen to this amendment. The attorneys who wrote it understood that the legislature would try to undermine it. This is a fundamental right. It is also self-executing. It does not need the legislature to pass any laws to put this into effect. As soon as voters approve it, it's law, it's in effect. So let me just give you a couple of quick examples of what it would do. Lake Okeechobee, everybody knows that it is terribly polluted. If the Army Corps of Engineers releases water or even schedules to release polluted water down the Caloosahatchee River or the St. Lucie River, well, if we had this amendment in our Constitution, we can take our DEP to court. We would argue before the court that there are 32 water basins around Lake Okeechobee that currently are not meeting water quality standards. The court could compel the DEP to do what it must do in order to meet those quality standards. This is more than just cleaning up the water before we send it south, which is what DeSantis is spending a lot of money on. This is stopping pollution at the source. You may know that our Supreme Court, the United States Supreme Court, recently changed the definition of waters of the United States. They opened up millions of acres of wetlands to potential harm and destruction. If we have this amendment in our Constitution, we can protect our wetlands. So I know I'm already at 15 minutes. I'm just going to go ahead here and let you know that we had lots and lots of support, over 200 organizations, businesses, even some local governments. They understand the critical need for what we are doing here. A lot of people have lost faith in our state regulatory system to do what it's supposed to do. So this is a citizens initiative. We need 900,000 signed and verified petitions by the end of this year to qualify for the ballot. We're not going to make it. Up until 4 or 5 weeks ago, we were still hoping things would go viral, but at this point, that's not going to happen. Having said that, though, we have, in the last few weeks, been talking to professionals who are also working on the Florida abortion amendment. They are honestly super impressed, even amazed that we were able to collect the 100,000 petitions that we did purely on volunteer efforts. No paid petition gatherers here. We did this on a shoestring budget. So they are looking to help, or already in the process of helping us for our 2026 campaign. I want you to know that we're not particularly disappointed. We're certainly not dismayed. In fact, we're very excited about our prospects for 2026. So what do we ask of everybody on the call? It is still worthwhile signing this petition. For us to say that we have reached 100,000 verified petitions is gold. That is going to attract a lot. It's going to keep a lot of support, but attract a lot of donors as well. It provides proof of concept. If you can get some of your family members to sign as well and send those in as soon as you can, that would be great. Faith communities offer a tremendous potential to provide hundreds of thousands of petitions, signed petitions. If you belong to a faith community, if you can get them involved, I realize you're not in Florida, but if you have Floridians who can mail in their ballots, that would be great. Get other organizations involved and donate. One of the biggest changes between our current campaign and the next one is that the next time around, we need to get millions of dollars. We can have all the passion and commitment in the world, but a legislature has made it such a Herculean task to qualify for the ballot that it necessitates millions of dollars. So I'm going to stop here, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Wow, Joe, I am so shocked about what's going on in Florida. I haven't lived in Florida in a long time, but the fact that everything is so polluted and that red tide is such an issue, and that under Republican governorships that they're destroying the natural beauty of Florida and the water, the clean water for people, it's pretty horrifying. 2024 is an election year, and we all need to vote, and we need to vote up and down the ballot to ensure that we can have some say in this, because I felt like crying when I was looking at those slides. If anyone has a question, please just type star hand up in the chat. And also, I'm going to put the petition in the chat one more time. Please sign it, send it back, tell your friends, make sure that you never know, we might be able to do it. We still have a month. Our first question is from Sally. Do you want to ask your question, Sally?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Angela. Florida is not an island, and a lot of its polluted water is generated by a number of different reasons. I mean, not all of it is the fault of any government. So, but my question is, if and when the amendment is passed, because I'm going to try to take a positive view on this, and someday it will pass, how do you envision enforcement of pollution, aquatic pollution that's coming from contiguous states? Thank you.
That's a very good question. I have never received that question before.
That's my specialty.
Okay. Can you be a little bit more specific? What pollution are we getting from other states?
Well, you're the specialist of why we're polluted, but all the rivers and the lakes in Florida do not generally, except for certain lakes, to my knowledge, are all generated just in Florida. They come from other rivers that flow into the Mexican Gulf, for example. So, you know, how does that fit in with Florida's boundaries and enforcement of clean water? I mean, red tide, for example, how are you going to stop red tide? How are you going to enforce cleaning up red tide?
Okay, so
that's a narrower question, okay?
Our amendment, I don't believe, would offer us any avenues to go after Georgia or Alabama along those lines. Okay. Having said that, so much of our water problems are generated by Florida that there is plenty for our amendment to work on. You mentioned red tide. It has been scientifically demonstrated that nutrient runoff from the Caloosahatchee River is exacerbating red tides down here in the Southwest coast. So we could use the amendment to compel the DEP. Actually, we take it to the court. The court would compel the DEP to start doing a heck of a lot more about nutrient runoff than it currently is.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you.
Our next question is from Dana. Do you want to ask your question, Dana?
I do. Thank you so much for that disturbing and compelling presentation, Joe. First, I want to remark that we do disseminate your petition monthly in our newsletter, and I have been for quite a number of months now through our Democratic Environmental Caucus Network. But my question is related to the many cases that are now taking place both at the state level court cases and at the federal level and all over the world, I might add, for kids suing their states for endangering the climate that they're living in, their fundamental right to grow up in a healthy environment, basically. Held v. Montana won. That was the first big case that won. There's the Children's Trust that oversees a lot of these cases. And I'm wondering if you had tried to contact them or align with them, that together you might create more power and initiative in terms of funding, in terms of momentum, and gaining signatures for your petition and really forwarding your efforts.
So we have not partnered with our Children's Trust. We have partnered with Green Amendments for Future Generations. That is being led by Maya Van Rossum. She's the leader of the National Green Amendment movement. And so, and she came down here. She did a nice tour through Florida, promoting our amendments. And so there's a lot of partnership between us and Green Amendments for Future Generations. What is important to note about our Children's Trust is that those other climate cases so far haven't been successful. The one Held versus Montana, which they were part of, was based on this constitutional amendment. That's why it's such a critical idea. As far as funding goes, I imagine that our Children's Trust is interested in getting as much funding as it can for its own uses. So we'll go about getting funding elsewhere. But the point is absolutely key. Having that fundamental constitutional right is critical. So down here, Florida young people could use it to protect waterways. Again, it's narrowly focused on water. If we had included climate or air, then our Florida Supreme Court would have said we violated that single subject rule. So you got to do one step at a time down here.
Thank you.
Well, does anyone else have a question? We're almost at the end of our allotted time for this. Gosh, Joe, you have hopefully we can get this on the ballot, if not this year, in 2026. It's very important.
We are feeling very good about those prospects for 2026.
And we'll want to work with you then too, Joe. Thank you so much for picking up and sharing this, and it will be posted online for our other members that couldn't join us tonight.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Joe.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure. Have a great day.
Thank you.
You too.